All right, super cool. So we are going to get started. What I would like to do is start with the fabulous introduction. So if I could start to my left.
Oh, okay. I'm William C. Dietz, Bill, if you will, and I'm a science fiction author. Write a lot of military science fiction as well as other stuff. And I've done, as regards this panel, I've written a lot of tie-in novels for properties like Star Wars and Halo and Hitman and Mass Effect and Resistance and StarCraft. So I've been through the mill, the process, if you will, of turning game universes into books. And there's kind of two flavors of that, which we may get into, which would be one, a straight-ahead novelization of a game, which is just taking it, turning it into a book, and then a book inspired by a game, which are really two different things. So that's what I might bring to the table.
Cool. Martha?
I'm Martha Wells. I'm mostly a fantasy writer. My first book came out in 1993. I have about 19 books, 20 books out. My most recent series is the Books of the Raxura fantasy novels. The last one came out, or the next to last one came out, The Edge of Worlds, in April. I've written media tie-ins. I've done 2 Stargate Atlantis novels and a Star Wars novel called Razor's Edge. It came out in 2013.
I'm Christopher Kastensmidt. I started in the video games industry in '97. Started working with literature, publishing literature in 2004, comics in 2010, and TV movies in 2014. So I've been, every 4, 5, 6 years, I go into a new media. I've been working with transmedia a lot. I've been working on projects for a lot of different companies, and I've been working on a lot of my own stuff as well. I've adapted prose to TV, prose to movies, prose to comics. So can talk about process there on any of that stuff.
Awesome. Gary?
Hi, I'm Gary Kloster. I've got a bunch of different short stories that are science fiction and fantasy, but kind of related to this, my first book that came out was a tie-in with the role-playing game Pathfinder. So it's one of the Pathfinder tales called Fire Soul, and I've got another one coming out probably next year with them. So that's kind of my particular niche with this topic, at least.
Awesome. My name is Monica Valentinelli. I'm your moderator for today. Most people know me for my work on Firefly. I've been working on Firefly since 2012. I did the role-playing game series, and then I also recently released a dictionary and phrase book in April, which is a dictionary and phrase book, in case you were wondering, which was super fun. And in addition to that, I've also worked on Shadowrun, Vampire the Masquerade as properties as well. Before we get too deep into the topic, though, what I would like to do is ask my fellow panelists, what are some of the terms that we are going to be using during this panel? Because I've already heard some terminology that we may use on the craft side that our audience may not be familiar with, like things like intellectual property and licensing and other things like that. Are there any terms, Chris?
Oh, terms. I don't know. Any terms that the audience
Like
would like to
when we
know
use the words
specifically?
intellectual property, does that ring any bells with anybody?
Everyone's okay
Okay,
with
everybody's
intellectual property?
very, very smart at WorldCon. The last time I did this panel, they said, no, we have no idea. So you guys are awesome.
Work for hire.
Work for hire, okay. Do you want to cover that?
Yeah, that would be good.
People have, know what that is.
Do you know what work for hire is? There's a bunch of naughty, shaky heads. So how about we talk about how we get hired for these projects, and then we can talk about the process of how we adapt them. Would you like to start, Gary, since you already
Sure.
worked for hire a bit?
I got hired as I went to a con. I went to Gen Con in Indianapolis, which is a huge gaming con, and James Sutter's the editor for Pathfinder Tales, the fiction part of that gaming system, and he was there doing a panel on like their authors and introducing them, and then afterwards they were all talking, and I was doing the lurking thing, and they did I'm surprised nobody asked how to become an author, so I went up and said, actually.
Can you please explain the lurking thing for the audience?
The lurking thing is when you're, after after the panel, and you're just sort of standing around casually waiting to talk. And there was an end, so I went up, and he basically explained that they like to have people that already had some experience with writing, and so I gave him my credits, and then we started. He asked me to send him some samples, which I did, and then we started doing pitches back and forth.
That's cool. Chris, can you think of a recent project or maybe a transitional project, like when you moved from prose to fiction or something like that? Like how did you get hired for some of those?
Networking would be number 1, 2, and 3. I think obviously you have to have publications, like you said. I mean, you need to get the foot in the door somewhere, somehow. You need to publish comics or literature or something. But after that, it's a question of. And I didn't even say, I live in Porto Alegre, Brazil. I'm originally from the United States, but I live in Brazil. I've lived there for 10 years. So I bridge as well between fandom in Brazil and in the United States. And I come to Worldcon pretty much every year, so I don't lose the contacts here. And it's funny, and I worked a long time in the video game industry. I was a studio head and sold a company to Ubisoft, which is a major multinational games company. And so, each experience there and each medium takes me into another world and another group of people, and you go in and you start meeting people. If you're it helps to be a little bit outgoing at least, or force yourself to talk and make these contacts. But I think most of the deals, I worked on 30 video games, for example, during my career in video games, and I was the one who had to sign deals for my company at the time. And most of those deals, it was very rare for me to sign a video game deal without some kind of personal contact. Like they had to have seen my face. I've signed, like out of those 30 deals, maybe 1 or 2 I signed completely online, completely. Okay, well, we'll trust you. We believe that you're not a robot. But it helps when they see that you're not a robot. That's a big thing. So definitely when I tell people, and this is what I tell starting writers and people who are going into, whether it's movies or comics or whatever, go to the events, meet people, go to workshops, go to any kind of place where you're actually going to meet professionals of the area you want to work in. So like you said, Gen Con.
Mm-hmm.
You want to work in games? Gen Con. You want to work in video games? Go to GDC, Game Developers Conference, or Game Connection, events like that. You want to work in comics? Go to things like, and not Comic-Con. Comic-Con, you'll just get lost in the crowd there. You'll be one face in 100,000. But if you go to something like Baltimore Comic-Con, which is a small professional event, if you're interested in literature, go to World Fantasy, which is more of a professional event, which has more contact with people working in that industry. And that's
Cool.
usually my advice. Yeah.
Cool. So we've talked a little bit about how they got jobs, and I would like to hear then, after you got hired, what were some of the steps for the contracting and some of the things that kind of led you up to the point where we want to start talking about process? Like what were some of those initial things that you had to
Did
do?
we define work for hire for the people who didn't? I don't think we did.
Okay. Do you want to go ahead and
Yeah.
do that in terms of the contracting on that?
Yeah, work for hire is when you don't own the property. Like when I was contacted to do, my agent was contacted about an author to do a Star Wars novel, and she suggested me, and that's how I got my Star Wars novel, basically. But I don't own Star Wars, I'm just being contracted to write this particular novel. When, like a normal, another kind of fancy book, because I have the original, I own the original concept for this, then it's not work for hire. So that's just the difference between that.
So that came up as part of the contract process. So after your agent got
Yeah,
contacted
you're
and
basically, you're being contracted to do to write a novel, a work for hire novel, which is a media tie-in. And the process was, we did the contract first, and then I had to submit an outline that they had to approve. And that took a long time, and eventually we got the novel, the outline approved, and then I worked back and forth with the editor on some things because she wanted a lot of oversight over it at first, and then basically finished the book. And after that, after the work, it's just, and for books really, it's just a matter of a different sort of contract than it would be for an original novel or for a novel from an original idea. So it's not too much of a different process for me to tie in writing. The difference comes in that you're trying to write the characters and form the plot to be as much a part of that universe as possible. You want to make it like another episode of the show or another movie, but with just an unlimited special effects budget is what you want. So basically,
I do want to come back to that in just a second. I wanted to give you a chance. So you've done a lot of different things.
So, just building on what she said, sort of a continuation of that thought, one of the things that makes a work-for-hire contract different from when you do your own original work is that you typically get no rights to, say, audio, no movie rights, no ancillary rights of any kind, and oftentimes no back-end royalty payments. You may, depending upon who you are and who they are and, a lot of different factors, get a small royalty at the back end. And often these get down to some interesting decisions. I'll give you an example. So when they approached me about writing Halo the Flood, one of the many Halo novels, it was a novelization, which is different than writing a tie-in where you're creating something completely fresh. A novelization is just taking the game and literally turning it into a book. Two things about that. One, you can just do it straight ahead, or two, you can do what I tried to do, which was to inject new material into it, which has to be negotiated with, the licensors and the team. And I successfully did that, and I needed to do that for my own sanity because I just could not sit down and just completely go from a game to a book. I had to have something there to keep me interested. And then on the deal, they offered me. I had a choice. I could take a certain amount up front, a larger amount, or I could take a smaller amount with a royalty at the back end. And that's where you as a writer have to decide, what do I think? Is this really going to go somewhere? Does it have that potential? Because if it does, I want to be on that royalty train. And if it doesn't, I don't want to be on that train. And so I didn't know anything about Halo. I went down to GameStop and asked the guy with the ponytail, what's Halo? And he, oh, dude, Halo is so incredibly cool, and all of that. He convinced me it was good, so based on that research, which I think you'll agree was pretty intense, I took the opportunity and I took the royalty, which long-term turned out to be a very good decision. But the other thing that goes with this is that the contract terms, which in this case was to write the book in 10 weeks, this gets down to an issue of having to do with what else are you doing, how fast are you, and a lot of things like that. So you really have to look at the terms to decide whether you can successfully deliver.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we will have a spot for questions at the end, okay? I just wanted to circle back to something that Martha said, because a lot of what we're talking about, many of us have specialized in different forms of adaptations and whatnot. Because there are different forms of writing, like you mentioned novelizations versus creating a novel and then, of course, translating it back and forth. One of the things that you talked about was essentially what are the rules of the setting so that it still feels like Star Wars, so that the rules do not, so that the world bends but doesn't break. So the reader's suspension of disbelief continues to be the same regardless of the form that we are exploring. And I would like to address this with some of the decisions that you have to make. And to help you get kicked off, I'll tell you what I had to do for Firefly. So I had the interesting challenge because Firefly was only one season long. And by the time I worked on Firefly, there was already a rabid fan base that had very steep expectations of what Firefly was. And I was able to, I was already a fan myself, so I was able to look at a lot of the criticisms online. I was able to look at a lot of the communities online and find out what those things were. And my challenge was, we needed to begin with the original property, but I needed to do it in a way that was new, that people wouldn't be bored with it because they've seen the episodes a million times. And then I had to figure out a way of expanding the setting in a way that made sense logistically for the world, that would make Fox happy and the licensing, but also the fans. So I had two bosses. I had the fans and the readers and the players, and then I also had the TV studio. And one of the ways that we did that, we started with a setting Bible that we built, and we also had what is known as an exclusions list. If you do not know what an exclusions list is, it's basically a list of things that you cannot do on your projects. If you can get that up front, that is gold, because that will save you some time in the long run. But those are some of the pieces that I had to do when I was first starting to think about adapting Firefly, not only for the game side, but also for reference material. And I want to explore this further because I think this is a huge part of the process. And I wanted to ask my panelists what were some of the things that you did to bend the rules but not break them?
Well, with Star Wars, I put in a bisexual character, even though I'm pretty sure they didn't want me to do it. It was not stated absolutely, but it was very much pushed back against. And she's not in there explicitly, but the subtext is there, and which is as much as you could do in 2013. They really didn't want you to do anything else. With Stargate Atlantis, it was a lot more fun and a lot easier. I think that universe was pretty much wide open. There's a lot of really fiddly rules about how the Stargate works and how certain things work, but the production company was not that interested in the tie-in novels. So the only stricture they gave me was, please don't kill anybody who's actually on screen. So, which gives you a lot of leeway, to do things. So, which is actually why I wanted to do the tie-in novel, the Stargate, or the tie-in novels, because my friend Rachel Kane had done one. And she had really done stuff in the tie-in novel I had never seen anybody do before. It's called Sacrifice Moon, and it gets very sexy in places, and I was like, wow, I'll let you do just anything, so I want to do this. But, so that was a lot of fun. And Star Wars was a lot different. It's a lot more restrictive, especially at that time period. It's changed now, but it was a lot more restrictive.
Cool. Would anybody else like to jump in? What were some of the things for bending the rules but not breaking them for the settings that you worked on?
Well, for Pathfinder, since it's a role-playing game, what they're trying to do with their novels is basically describe the world for people in richer detail. They expect people to make stories of their own. So there was no characters that I had to worry about, like you can't kill these characters, you can't do that. It's just kind of a wide open in some ways. But what they were really worried about is they'd seen other companies do this where the books were kind of driving the narrative of their games. Where, if you remember Dragonlance for D&D, and that was what people really saw, sort of what the game was. And those were the big important characters in that. And they wanted it to be different. They wanted it to be that the game experience for the players, they were sort of the characters they were making were the big important people in this world. And so the books were more focused on describe the world, tell an interesting story, but don't make it about like save the world. Don't make it about, this city's going to get destroyed. Don't make it about you have to fight this god. It was supposed to be more focused on smaller things, which was kind of fun. I mean, because it was pretty wide open in a lot of ways. I didn't have to worry about, certain things. I could make up all my own characters and things. But, they were very interested in making sure that this wasn't going to be like the big driving epic of this world.
So in your case, the stakes were smaller. That was one of the things that you had to do. And then in your case, especially for Star Wars, the characters were something that they focused on.
Yeah, they had certain, there was a lot of oversight about what you could and couldn't do with the characters. Actually, one of the fun things I think in doing media tie-ins is trying to find the little space that the show or the movie has not talked about yet, so you can kind of slide your story into there, and it really does feel like a piece of the whole.
Did anybody else have anything?
I can add one thing. You were talking about the rule book, what are the exceptions, what are the exclusions and this. And I think it's, I've never worked with anything as old as, let's say, Spider-Man. But if you take something like Spider-Man, what is your reference for that? Where do you start? There is so much material there because you have, like 80 years or more of comic books, you have movies, you have TV shows, you have all that. What's canon for that? And but today, usually we work with, like Ubisoft. We would have Assassin's Creed. We have what we call the story Bible, right? It says those are the rules. We have a rule book. Let's make a rule book from day one. Here is what you can do with these characters. Here's what you can't. Here's a timeline. Everything needs to fit on this timeline somewhere. Here's the relationships. We'll make a big diagram pointing out the relationships between all these characters. We need that. And that's like, am I going to go back and play every Assassin's Creed game and read every novel to write the next one? Probably not, because that would take me months just to get through all of that content. The games take 40, 80 hours just to get through by themselves. And so that's what the story Bible for. It's condensing that. And usually there's people who work inside the big companies just to control the story Bible and make sure the projects don't get out of that.
Did you want to add anything?
I guess, I would try not to be repetitive, so I'll just flip it over and we can look at it from a different thing. Once in a while, you're doing a tie-in property, and they will want you to break it. They will order you to break it, and you do that at your risk, of course. In my case, they ordered me to kill somebody in Mass Effect in a book. That was a treasured character, been established by another author and by the game, and was, had been around for quite a while. And of course, what happens is that, readers, they think Bill Dietz killed the character. They don't realize that BioWare killed the character, that was their choice, and that Bill Dietz was asked to do it. So guess who they flame? And I mean,
take one for the team.
Oh yeah, and I'll tell you what, there was some pretty amazing, troll stuff going on that I had to put up with for a couple of months. So, that's the flip side. Another example of that would be I worked on Resistance, and they had their main character was a guy named Nathan Hale, obviously stolen from American history. And, futuristic, universe with aliens taking over the planet, basically, to just kind of condense the whole thing down. So, like at the end of game 2, they have a secondary character. They killed him in the game. They killed Nathan Hale in the game, so it wasn't me. But then they wanted me to take the secondary character, the one who killed him, and make him the main character of a book. So now you're taking the guy who killed the hero, and you're going to turn him into what? I mean, he's a villain in the minds of most people, and yet you have to make him into something else. So these are some of the wacky challenges that you get into.
So, some things that we've kind of brought up just peripherally is there's a process that we have to go through on the business side of the equation, right? Because there's the contracting, and there's the craft sequence that we go through, which tends to be a very intellectual and almost a very solitary process. So we can wrap our mind around these projects. Mm-hmm. But then there's the intersection with our own fandoms and what we bring to the project, but also how that interacts with other fans. And that this is something that I would like to address. I mean, all of us have worked on properties that have fans and fan expectations. Do you have any positive and to build off of what you said, do you have any positive things that you've learned from those experiences, or things that felt made your process easier as you were doing adaptations, or were there challenges once that fandom was involved? Like, would you like to start?
Well, in my case, it's interesting because I think one of the reasons that sometimes authors who have their original fiction like you do and so on, they do tie-ins with the thought, well, maybe I can expand my readership. Maybe I'll be able to get Resistance players to come over and read Bill Dietz books. My experience has been that doesn't really work most of the time. Most of the people who are, intensively into Resistance, or they're into StarCraft, or they're into Star Wars or whatever, that's just what they want to read. And if it's not in that, if it's not in that universe, I never saw any build. I never got any real feedback that indicated, oh, dude, it's great what you did with, whatever, and showing that, that they were doing both things, reading, the tie-ins. And I'm sure there were some people, but they weren't so impressed that they said anything to me. So I didn't have that kind of interaction.
Interesting. I actually did. I did have people have come and told me that they've they read my Star Wars book and then went and looked at my fantasy novels and liked those. And Stephen actually did that, so is it Roqoo Depot?
Yeah.
Okay. That website, he actually reviewed my fantasy novels also after he reviewed my Star Wars novel. One of the most helpful things for me from fans is when I was doing the Stargate books it was Stargate Atlantis, but that builds on, it's the same canon as SG-1, which had been out for 10 years by that, or close to, I think it was 8 years at that time. And so you have 8 years of canon, and it's a lot of episodes and a lot of fiddly details, and there was no series Bible that they gave us.
Mm-hmm.
So we just were kind of on our own. But I had one of my friends in the fandom, she had done a really extensive, meticulous website going into a lot of detail from the show and cataloging it of all things like what equipment they had that was from the North Face and the rules for how the Stargates worked and where these things came from and the starships and everything. So that was enormously helpful because whenever I needed to look up the detail about the weapons or anything like that, she usually either had it or she knew a pretty good place to go get it. So yeah, that was extremely helpful. And sometimes that fan resource can be real helpful to you.
Very quickly, I also work on Vampire the Masquerade, and one of the very interesting things now is that we have this thing called canon. And we actually have a huge fan base in Brazil. So I was like, hey, recently I added a Brazilian character to a Vampire the Masquerade book, and 20 years ago, I would not be able to do that as effectively. I would not be able to research the culture as effectively unless I would be able to contact somebody. And because of our relationship with the licensing, I was able to post the draft of this character to get feedback from fans in Brazil, because we wanted to do something very specific with this character. Maybe they had a background in Candomblé. There were all these other sorts of things. And we had Brazilian fans discussing / arguing / educating each other about the own history of the country, because this character had been around for a couple hundred years, and it was really cool. That's stuff that I couldn't do 20 years ago.
There's a story from when they were first filming Farscape, where the first 3 episodes were all filmed at the same time, and they each had a different director, and so he told them to do different things with the communicators, to activate their communicators, and so they were trying to later they were trying to like put that together and figure out a series Bible for themselves. And one of the people just said, well, the production people said, the fans will figure it out for us. They'll take these 3 different systems and resolve them. And yeah, they checked the fan site board that had already gone up, and people had discussed it and broken it down and figured out how the process of how those communicators worked. And so they're like, okay, use that. That's perfect.
My publisher publishes Vampire and
Oh yeah, cool.
that stuff in Brazil. So
Yeah, very
yes,
cool.
it's very popular.
Yeah, very popular. Very popular. Did you have any intersections with fans in your work, positive or negative?
Yeah. Positive or negative?
Do you want to think about that?
Yeah, I'll think about that.
Okay, all right, Derek.
I had a thing where I just finished the sequel, and of course, I was given the sequel, and I'm like, well, I got to remember what I did in the first book, and I went online, and somebody they'd done a wiki for every book that's come out for Pathfinder, so my book was there, so I could read through that. It's a great little summary of everything that happened and all the stuff and a lot of the details, and so it's like, oh, this is nice, And it was really kind of cool to see that online and be like, oh, well, somebody really, really read this,
It happens with original fiction too, and you see a lot of authors, especially on Facebook, will say, okay, does anybody remember what this character's eye color was in such and such book 3 books ago? And somebody will always come up and remember. Some people just have really good memories for text. So.
I would like to open it up into questions in just a minute. What I would like to do is ask my fellow panelists for their top 3 do's and don'ts when doing adaptations, and you can pick any form, any medium that you would like. I don't know if anybody has any off the top of their head.
I have one. I'm not sure if I have top 3, but the one I think would be to be sympathetic to the source material. Is don't do something that you don't have a good opinion of, because that will come through in the book. And to try not to play favorites with the characters, and try to make try to characterize that character not just the way they do it on the show, but try to really get into their POV and see through their eyes. And because I've seen some people come in with unsympathy, you know, they don't like, they have a character that they don't like in the show, so they make them, you know, a ridiculous character or something like that, and it doesn't, and you know, the fans don't like that, and it doesn't come off, as being, we're being attacked by a bug. It doesn't come off as very good in the book. It doesn't come off as very professional, I think.
Okay, so number one, acknowledge that you can be a fan, but you are writing for multiple people to read the work.
Yes.
So try to be as authentic as possible.
Yeah.
Bill, did you have any do for dogs?
Yeah, I would, excuse me, I would say among the do's would be first, do realize that you've been hired to do something and that you're working in somebody else's, you know, backyard, and you need to follow their rules. And you need to understand that they have a team that is heavily, heavily invested in this thing. And that, you know, this may be a game team, it may be a publisher, it may be other writers that have gone before you. You know, it varies. But if you're not a team player, if you're not somebody who has good interpersonal skills and so on, you're going to be in deep trouble before long, because you've got to negotiate your way through this. They're not going to just let you do whatever you want. They have a notion of what and it's not necessarily written in the Bible. I remember in Halo, I'd go, well, I want to do this and that, and they'd go, oh, that character would never do that. And I'd go, well, really? I didn't see that in the Bible. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm just here to tell you they wouldn't do that. And so, you know, you have this culture and this mystique and stuff that only they know, and they all work together. So that's one thing to do. I think another thing to do is to, if it's a game, which, you know, I've done a lot of game to books things, then you need to play the game. And if there's 3 games, you need to play the 3 games. And you need to become, you know, a real expert on that game, so you can walk into the room with the game team and sit down and talk their stuff. And you can play that game as well as they can play it, or at least close, so that, you know, they believe that you know that you're in the realm. And then thirdly, you know, often in these game to book type deals, you have a publisher to take care of. And so if you want to continue to work with them and to you know, do more projects in the future, understand what their needs are and what they're going for, which is a book that sells, and make their life easy. You know, understand that they're purchasing agents, basically. Deliver on time. You know, keep your word. Don't be a jerk. You know, all of those kind of things that make things good for them, and then they'll come back and hire you again.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'd say know your medium, work with the medium, understand what's strong about each case. I do the opposite of most everyone here. I don't go to prose. I go from prose to comics or to games or to other medium. And so I think you really need to understand what is strong about this. Why are we taking it here? If you're working with a comic book, what does that mean? If you work with a comic, you have to think about the page, you have to think about the layout of the page, you have to think about which page is going to face the other page. You take a lot of things into account, and there's a lot of tools there. There's a lot of interesting tools in let's say a comic book that you don't have in a movie. I can break out of a panel. I can't do that in a movie. I can't escape from the screen. I can't have an arm stick out from the screen. But in a comic book, I can. In a video game, a lot of writers who go from other media to video games write really crummy games because they're used to having total control over that story. I'm going to tell a story. It's going to go A, B, C, D, E, F, which is not the way a game works. A game is good when I can jump from A to D and go back to B and then break all the rules and do something that the writer never imagined. And so each medium has its challenges and its strengths, and you need to figure out what those strengths are and work to those strengths. What's a great story that I can tell in an interactive game, or what's a great story that I can tell visually with a comic book? And so a lot of research, see what's going on, because don't look at comics from 50 years ago to make a comic today. You're going to have a really out-of-date language that you're using there. So look at what's coming out, look at what's popular, and work with the strengths.
Cool. I would like Gary to.
Kind of similar to what's been said. I think as a dude, you want to know what you're doing. You want to be a part of the property to some extent that you're interested in. I mean, if you're ready for a game, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to play that game all the time. You need to be a game player, somebody who has done that experience and kind of knows what people want from that experience, so you can kind of tie it in to the tie-in. You know, like get some of that same feelings of both. On the flip side of that, I think in some ways, if you are somebody who's obsessed with that property, that may actually be a limit. If you're somebody who plays Halo all the time, knows every bit of Halo and everything, then you might be really upset when they tell you to kill a character or something like that. It may kind of limit you. You feel like, no, you know, I have this world in my head and I know exactly what it is. So sometimes being a little bit flexible, not being completely, you know, thinking about, I know this property backwards and forwards, I should write for them. It can help, but it can also slow you down some.
Can I interject just one thing there to build on what he said? You know, if you do a property, in this case I'm talking about Resistance, I wrote 2 books for them, and over time I became so knowledgeable about that property that, and I was working, you know, with Sony was the ones who were actually producing the game, that eventually they hired me to write a game, and then suddenly I was on the other team, you know, where you're creating the game and all of that, and then you become familiar with this whole nother level of politics, which is the level designers, you know, and all these level guys own their level, and they don't care about the game, they only care about their level, and they want, you know, their level to be great, and so you know, it's like a game within a game within a game, and that makes it even more interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. The level is the unit of storytelling. It's not the chapter, it's the level.
Exactly.
That's the change in mentality you have to tell the story.
And you know, and if you're playing a game, you're probably not aware of the fact that level, which was the stuff between 2 cutscenes often, you know, that was by somebody different, that there are separate teams doing that, and it looks like one big thing to you if it's good, but it isn't necessarily so.
I would like to finish very quickly, and I would like to open it up to questions. So, and I will start with you because you have been waiting very patiently. Thank you very much.
Related to what they were saying at the time, so
Okay. So one of the things that I discovered going through all of the processes that I did is that there is an intellectual part of the process, and we've talked a lot about that, and we've talked a little bit about the emotional process. There is an emotional cycle when you are a fan of a property to earning money to write for that property or translate that medium and whatnot. And it changes the discussion because a lot of times there's a whole bunch of things that are happening behind the scenes for a process that people are not aware of. TV and movies half the time, I mean, they're miracles that they get made. They don't have these elaborate worlds that they develop from the get-go. They write the scripts based on the sets they can get. I mean, Firefly, a lot of the episodes were shot in 2 or 3 days. And there's a lot of weird things that might fall down, especially, you know, depending upon who's doing the script cop or all these other sorts of things. And as you learn more of these things about it, it can disillusion you from the thing that you love, because really what fandom is, and I think this is something that's very important to remember, is fandom is all about emotion. It's really not about how great something is in terms of the physical prose or anything like that. It's about that, did you capture that emotion so it feels like Halo, it feels like Star Wars, it feels like all the other Pathfinder and all the other things that we're talking about. And if you can capture that emotion, that is what I feel is a successful project, regardless of craft. And when you don't, you will know it. At the same time, fans in particular, it's something that they don't care about the business processes. And I'm not saying that you don't care about the business processes, but going through the review cycles and getting the feedback for our work, if like to your point earlier, if a company says, you have to do X, they blame the author because you are the face. The fans, they don't necessarily, it's not that they don't want to be told that that's the reason why, it's because they are reacting to the emotion of their character being killed, and that's really why they're upset. And it's a very fine line to walk. So I do feel that there are some relationship management, not only with the people involved in the process, but also with yourself, and kind of recognizing where those emotions are coming from, especially since we are writers and we focus on what people say and do and read all the time for feedback. We have been speaking for a very long time, and I do want to open it up to questions. Does anybody have any questions for us, or otherwise I can come up with more questions? Go ahead.
I'm just wondering if there's ever been a time, this is really more in a sense, where you've been offered property or something suggested, taking property from one medium to another, and you've just looked at it and go, no. I was thinking of both the Orchid theme and that turns into adaptation because it was so impossible to translate.
Okay.
Where it worked, or like, nobody can do Game of Thrones, but yet somehow that TV show seems okay. But have you ever had anyone where you just look, I can't do it, no gonna do it?
So the question is, have we ever been offered a property and we said, no, that can't be done, and we are not going to go ahead and do this?
I always think you can take it somewhere. The problem is when they put constraints on it and you say, no, that can't be done. That's the problem. I was about to actually say budget, because budget is important when you change medium. It's huge. And I remember, I heard George Martin talking once about the last episode of the first season of Game of Thrones had a call to arms. And the way he wrote the scene in the script, and he gave it to the producers, and they looked at it and they said, well, this scene here, if we did it the way you wrote it, we would use our entire budget for the season. So we're not going to do that, And so sometimes it's, we're talking about fan expectations and taking things. So, I tend to sit down with the team. I haven't been talking really specific cases. I did a script for Starlight Adventures, which has 5 million players now. It's a video game. These aren't like mega Star Wars and stuff like this, but 5 million players. I took that to comics. And sometimes I go to them. They actually hired me to do transmedia for them. I said, let's take, what's your budget? This, comics. It's like, we're not going to do an animated series with this budget you've got here, And so sometimes it's not even that, let's take it to this. It's like, what's your budget? What are we working with here? If you're going to give me millions, well, we can already make a cartoon out of this. And actually afterwards they hired me to do a pilot for an animated series and things like that. And it's growing and growing, but you got to have a certain order there maybe. But I think, we use the cartoons to expand that universe, to add new characters, and then we take those to the next one, we take those to the next one. It's a process, but a lot of the process has to do with budget. It's just a question of, no, I think we can make a game. I'm sure we can. We can invent something, but sometimes they'll come in, I want a game that this happens, and once again, that's not the way the game works. Let me make a game. Let me work with an interactive property and create something.
So is there a property that you wouldn't work on? Anybody? Bueller?
Well, there are properties that I wouldn't work on. I wouldn't knowingly work on something that was outside what I consider to be the realm of my expertise, such as it is. But I'll flip that over and say I took a job once that I shouldn't have taken.
Oh, interesting.
Because I did not honestly tune to it, and I told my agent I don't think that's probably me. And then he said, but they're offering XYZ, and it was twice what I get paid for one of my regular books. And I said, oh, well, then I suddenly feel really good about this. And it wasn't a good experience, and I shouldn't have done it. That was crass commercialism on my part. I should have stuck with, I should have stuck with my original instincts, and I was a bad Bill, so, these things happen.
I'm kind of the same way. I feel I don't want to do a media tie-in unless I'm already a fan of whatever it is, because I feel unless I'm coming to it with a certain amount of affection, then it's just going to be so hard, and if I do run into problems, I'm just going to want to quit, and it's better for everybody concerned if I come in with already a positive attitude of I'm going to enjoy this, and this is going to be fun because I like this so much, and I really want to play in this universe.
Gary, or is there a property you wouldn't take?
Pretty much the same thing that's already been said. If it's something that I have no interest in, it's like there's a bunch of money to do an dictation from the Kardashians or something. It's like, no. You know?
For me personally, I ask some leading questions because writers get paid not only based on the number of words that we do, but how long it takes for us to do a project, right? And if I'm working on a project, and even if I like the project, but the people involved make it extremely difficult. Sometimes what happens in adaptations is that the people that own the property don't know the craft side of it, and that's why they hire us, because we're the experts. But there's a big difference between, I want to make this thing happen, this is the way I envision this character, to this is a character, right up to this is the characterization of that character in a novel. And no, you cannot see the dice rolling in a novel. That's actually bad game writing for novelizations and whatnot. And if there's those sorts of things, I might drop it. But I feel that doing a lot of upfront work to ask questions and think things through would be really good. There are some properties that I am not really interested in doing, and those would be properties that can't expand the setting as much anymore. I think it would be very difficult for me to do Lord of the Rings unless I could have the Ents get back together. If the Ents and the Entwives could get back together, I would be all over that. But if I can't do that, I don't know. That would be very tough. But any other questions for us? Because we've got a couple of minutes. Otherwise, I can ask another question and we can decide we're looking to start saying amazing things. So it is 10 minutes to 3, and I was wondering if anybody had some closing thoughts on the subjects, maybe something that I didn't cover or something that you would like to offer as words of encouragement for our audience if they are either considering this, or if you have something that somebody else has written or done as an adaptation that you would recommend.
Well, I think I can respond to the first half of that probably more easily than the second half, because I would have to, give that some serious thought. But I would say, just a general comment about writing tie-ins is that I think it's an honorable thing to do. It has, within the literary community, it's considered by some people to be, kind of scut work, or, the kind of thing that hacks do. I don't agree with that. I think that oftentimes it's working within a community of interest where, many, many minds contribute, and over time the thing evolves. Star Wars is clearly that. I mean, thousands of people literally have contributed to the ideas and all the texture and all of the fabric of what Star Wars is over a period of, 30, 40 years now, whatever that is. And so I think it's an honorable thing, and I think it's a good thing, and I think that it should be approached that way, that you should always bring your best to it.
I actually have a recommendation. If you want to look at an interesting adaptation. Sorry.
That is an awesome ringtone.
I had the loudest one I could.
But it's a mystery property. MC Beaton writes mystery novels, and I don't happen to like her novels very much, but she wrote a series about Hamish Macbeth, and it was adapted for it's called Hamish Macbeth, and it was adapted for a TV series in the UK, and it's the most incredible, funny, dark, very deeply dark and funny at the same time TV series with a lot of really cool characters. And I do not know how they got it out of those books. I don't know. And it even adds a supernatural element into the TV series, which was not in the books. And it works perfectly. And it's an interesting example of taking a written property, which usually it goes the other way. It's like the TV property will strip out kind of what's interesting and cool sometimes about the TV or the book, because there's just not enough. There's not enough room in the show to do it.
I got it. We need to stop, unfortunately, but thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate it.